I
Hi,
have,
Sandy. Yes.
Kelsey,
Yeah.
all I can see is your right hand. It would be great
Yeah.
if you could move so I could see you. It's
I'm not
okay
going to be.
if that's
I'm
not
not going to be
possible.
saying much, Sandy. I can
What?
still. I'm not going to be saying much after the next minute or two.
I can see
Yeah,
you
yeah.
now. Thank you.
Okay. So let's. This computer decides to do what it's supposed to do. We'll be all set. Great. So the first couple of items on the agenda are always on the agenda. Welcome to the meeting. The instructions for exiting the building. Your two options from this room. There's a stairwell and an elevator to your right. If there's also a safe refuge area over there if you needed to be rescued for any reason. If the path that direction is blocked, if you go straight down the hallway to the east, and all the way to the end, there's another stairwell. So those are your two options to get out of here on the third floor. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in the order of the agenda items? Seeing none. Open to the public for items not related to the agenda. We have one member of the public online. Ryan, do you have anything you'd like to raise at this time?
Yeah. So about a year ago, I came to the Affordable Housing Committee meeting. The city council had just passed, um, I don't want to say a bill, but like an ordinance to do inspections. And despite having a very young housing stock, it is the most expensive per inspection of any of the other places in Vermont. But unlike a town like Burlington, which has tons of protections for renters, that program didn't really have anything that really speaks to renters' actual needs. So I thought it was really crass of the city council to just put all those concerns back on me as a renter and member of the public to then bring to you and to not facilitate any of that dialogue or to even have done any of it before passing that really expensive measure. But things didn't quite work out with meeting schedules and whatnot. So I want to make sure that that stays on the docket for you guys to cover. And I think there's a little bit later on in priorities that relates to that, that it fits into very well or relates directly. So I just want to make sure that that gets incorporated and to hear how you guys are going to proceed this year and into 2025. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Any announcements and staff reports? So announcements generally is from all of you, including Elizabeth. If there's anything particular about housing from city council, this is when you jump in and share. And then I can share, and then anyone else who has any, community events or members of the public have brought something to you that's not on the agenda or anything like that. This is an opportunity to do that. And then I can offer just anything that's changed on the staff. Anything I can report on that has happened from the city end to you would happen during that time. So any announcements from all of you? Sandy?
This is really a question. I was unable to attend the housing conference, the biennial housing conference that's done every other year in November. And I was wondering if anybody on the committee attended, and it's always such a great conference. If anyone attended, if they have any takeaways they might share.
I attended. Did anyone else? Yeah, I think they had record turnout. I think they said that there were up to like 300 attendees at the VHFA conference this year. They had this person who was an artist that did kind of almost like doodle interpretations of different workshops, which was really cool. So the Housing 101 had this kind of cool visual of describing the housing system. I'm trying to remember the author of The Sum of Us. I'm forgetting her name right now, but she was the keynote speaker and she was really, really good, just kind of talking about how we're raised to always think that we're like losing something if someone gets something else. And so she was kind of reframing it as like diversity and inclusion actually benefits the whole community, and we need to be talking about it in that way of how, like, even for people who are, you know, white in the community, that it like benefits them for us to have diversity too and to come from that kind of narrative. She has a podcast on Spotify. And they're just like little blips. She like was a social scientist who quit her job and then like traveled around the country to hear about housing firsthand. And there's some interesting little tidbits there. There's one on Lewiston, Maine. That's probably the closest to us. But yeah, that's all I can really share. And what was her name? Her book is The Sum of Us.
Oh,
She's an economist.
Heather McGee?
Yes, Heather McGee. Yep, she was great.
Sandy, was this the conference that 2 years ago, the keynote speaker extolled the virtues of having a housing, a zoning and planning almanac?
Mhm.
Okay. Megan, do you know if anything happened on that subject in the last 2 years?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
does anyone know? How's that coming?
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
in existence. Yeah,
It's
I
such
just
a great
went
idea.
To a housing meeting yesterday, and there was a person from Vermont State presenting on all the data that they have on housing, and the atlas was one piece of that. They said during the conference that right after that speaker last year, this it seemed like maybe like a PhD student or something went up to the speaker and started the Vermont zoning atlas like that exact day. Like it grew from that. So
Yeah,
I
so
think
there's a nationwide zoning atlas, and each state has been kind of managing who they put in charge of compiling the information from the state. It's not, my understanding is it's not hyper detailed, because you really can't. But it has a lot of good information about like lot size minimums and things like that that are, you know, big impact items, not like lighting standards or something that's more granular. My understanding is the Vermont approach has been including the data science and GIS people from UVM with Vermont State people and moving that forward. I don't think Vermont is complete, but they're well on the track.
So we can't access it online yet, but before long, hopefully, right?
I'm not sure. You will be able to, but I don't know what the current status is as of today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When that's available, it'd be very nice to have some sort of presentation on it for this group.
I will follow up with Leslie Black Plumo, because I know she has done some outreach trying to recruit people to work on developing it. And I think they had some people at VHFA working on it. Students especially, I think, graduate
Yeah.
students.
It was gonna be very labor intensive. You know, on the point of that conference, I looked at it and I looked at the agenda and thought, gee, this would be nice. And then I looked at the price for attending, and it was many hundreds of dollars, as I
Yeah.
recall, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Yeah. It would be nice if the planning office were to send out a notice to people on the housing committee or something next year, or in 2 years, it's every other year, saying we can send one person from the housing committee, or 2 or 3 or something.
Yeah, I don't know what the budget is for that kind of stuff for
Yeah.
committee members, but that's definitely something I can mention.
Did anyone from the planning and zoning office go?
No, we didn't go to that. We recently attended the Vermont Development Conference, which is sort of a different take on it, but the people in that room are the finance people and the development community, lawyers, real estate agents, things like that. So we spend a lot of time in our planning world. So that was what we've done recently to sort of take a different perspective at housing and the development.
Good.
Hurdles.
I'm fairly certain the city has paid for 1 or 2 committee members to attend that conference in the past, but it may be quite a while ago.
Thank you, Sandy.
Mhm.
I wonder, since this is our first meeting together, we might introduce ourselves to each other.
Sure,
in terms of who we are and what our interest is.
yeah, absolutely.
And I'd be
Any-
glad to start.
Yeah. Before we do that, any other quick announcements about events that you know that are coming up or anything else? It's kind of the end of the year, so there's not really much happening between now and our next meeting, but just wanted to wrap up this agenda item, but go for it, Larry.
It is sort of an announcement about who we are.
Yeah, there you go. Announce yourself.
So I've been Larry Kupferman. I've been the chair of the trust fund, and I noticed the resolution here was 2015. So I've been it since 2015. But my interest really is in conservation. And I'm on the Natural Resources Conservation Committee, and I do not see a conflict in that. Okay, because I think they both go together quite well when it works out. So I just wanted to, say that I'm very weak on policy, and I know Housing Committee has had great in-depth discussions about the policy of housing, and I'm all for it, but I tend to get lost in the detail. Having said that, I'm happy to be with all of you to merge these efforts. One thing about the trust fund, it actually hasn't met that often. It did not have regular meetings, it was on demand. So we don't have a lot of
As needed.
as needed, and we don't have a lot of history in terms of records and notes, and because the city manager was the staff person who did it. Kevin started, and then Jesse, and we might have had 2 meetings with Jesse and had some allocation at some point. That's me.
And last year, you met with us a couple of times.
Oh, right.
Be- Yeah,
Right. We did merge our effort on the ARPA money,
yeah,
which is part of our discussion again.
it was really helpful to have us together for that.
Oh, yeah, that was super. Go Vince.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, thank you. I was on the Affordable Housing Committee for a couple of years. Happy to be on this combined committee. Professionally, I'm a sociologist, retired from St. Michael's College. And so I kind of dabbled in some of this stuff, inequality, environment, different types of social problems, kinds of things. So I'm not a policy guy either. I get easily lost in it. But this is a good committee to be on. For me, I think I have something to say professionally. And what else can I say? I lived down on Dorset Street, lived there for 45 years. Happy to be here.
My name is Megan. This is my first meeting. I just moved to South Burlington. I bought a house in March. I work in affordable housing for the last 6 years. I worked for Champlain Housing Trust. Sandy, I think we were on the community relations committee for a while together there. And then I work for Evernorth, which is a tax credit syndicator.
Great.
And I just got a new position there that's focused on, that's asset management. But before, I've been doing a lot of resident services, resident leadership, and I am in a public policy master's program right now. I don't understand it. I'm trying to understand that stuff because I want to, have better housing policy out there. Yeah, and I come from, actually, I graduated from environmental science, and the Housing Conservation Board is what led me to housing and make me love this area and this community.
Oh,
So
that's great.
yeah.
Super.
Good connections.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Fitzgerald. I'm your council liaison. I had an interest in this committee for a number of reasons. I think there's obviously a need for housing. I think that runs the gamut of housing, the missing middle, affordable housing, understanding land use within South Burlington. I was very excited to sit in on a planning commission meeting and really hear the commission speak to the interest in seeking and collaborating with the housing committee on future LDRs and the zoning regulations that really acknowledge that South Burlington is a really special community to be, and how do you preserve neighborhoods, and how do you create housing there's a great need to bring a workforce in, kind of leveraging the economic development side, as well as the conservation side. My background is in engineering, and I work primarily in general management within the healthcare field for a long time. I am retired now and have been a South Burlington resident for several decades.
Yes, my name is Anastasios. I can be called by Tassos as a nickname short. I am one of the staff, the trust committee that Larry is the chief of, was the chief. My interest is practically to get involved and give into the community and support in many areas as if I can. My background, I'm an analyst. I work for a local credit union, so I crack numbers. I do a lot of analysis when it comes to businesses and of course housing as well. So if I can be in any help in that area, my weakness also is policies and legal stuff as well. I do have a hard time in that area, but I'm sure I can mitigate between my strength and weaknesses a lot of things. And that's it. I've been a resident in the area for at least 10 years now. Possibly be a candidate for a bigger housing, because maybe need to grow and go to a bigger space. So that's it.
My name is Nora Senecal. I've been on I was on the Affordable Housing Committee last year. It was my first year on the committee. And I'm happy to be on the Housing Committee this year. And I think I attended a couple of things prior to be on the committee of their bigger events. And I think what I really enjoy about being on the committee and being more active in attending city council meetings and reviewing policy is that this is where we kind of take a deep dive on what's happening around housing. This is it. The devil is in the details for sure, right? And sometimes it feels a little, you can look at these big stacks of things, but it is really interesting, and the history of it is very important. And there's a lot of room for greater coordination and education of the community, and there shouldn't be a false thing of conservation or housing or high taxes and less housing or all these sort of binaries that are set up to basically stall good policy making. So one of my hopes in being on the committee and continuing on the committee is to continue to be a part of things like, providing letters to the zoning committee like we did last year about minimum lot size, right? Doing some educational events for the public like we did for ADUs. We did that last year, Janet and I. And then also really examining what's being proposed and how will that have a downstream effect on either people who live here or people who want to live here. I work for UVM in adult psychiatry, and our neighborhoods are really important, and we can add to our neighborhoods instead of just, wanting to, rather than just kind of plop housing everywhere, just try and build communities. And part of it has to do with my background in social work. I have a master's degree in social work, and I work as a therapist for UVM. Having good transportation, having accessibility to safe, affordable housing, paying attention to our renters, is really important to me, and having spaces for families to live and their children to play safely. So these are all things that are important to me, and why I enjoy being on the committee and working. I have a master's degree in social work, and then my undergrad is in history. Back to that, enjoyable to read why are we here, right? And government and policy. So probably this brings out a molding of things that are important to me. I've lived here for lived here for 23 years. I've lived in South Burlington for about 16, 18. But I also rent a space in my house and have for over a decade. And so I see some of these things that go on. And so I come from that perspective of sharing space and providing space to people. So, thank you.
Thank you. Sandy. You're muted, Sandy.
Can you unmute her?
No, she has to unmute herself.
Now she's frozen.
All I can do is ask to unmute.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you, Sandy.
Okay. Involvement with city stuff with housing started, I think, in 2012 or 2011, when there was a task force on housing that's the city council created and produced a report called the Path to Affordability. And then following that, there was a committee on inclusionary zoning. These were ad hoc committees, weren't standing committees. And on the trust fund, to create the trust fund, and maybe there's another one anyway. And then eventually this council created the Affordable Housing Committee that I've been on. I was also on the Champlain Housing Trust for 9 years. I also have an MSW, although I have done a lot of work in policy, but I helped. I mean, it may seem like not much, but renting and housing has always been so expensive. But I did help 2 families when I worked directly with families buy a house, and I just saw how that sort of transformed their sense of their place in this world. And I also, this business of how important housing is. It's not only important in terms of scarcity and the price, affordability, but how it impacts, family and societal functioning. So, and there's this not new, but the housing first principle that you don't reward people with housing after they've gotten a hold of their substance abuse issue or their mental health issues. Housing first, that's the foundation that you build that on. And I just want to mention, and I can send you the link to you, Bill Schubart had a really good piece in V Digger on Monday talking about housing as being housing first, and mentioning other countries where they're really working on it. And it's really being used here, but I think that message about how housing should be a human right, and how important it is to a thriving community and society needs to be. I'm happy to be on this new committee. Oh, I want to say one thing. I'm really pleased with the new regulations, and it seems like educating the community about them. I don't know what the city has in mind, and I want to thank and express my admiration for Kelsey's role in that, because I know it was major.
Thank you, Sandy. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
All right.
Do you want to
Thanks for
introduce
doing that,
anything about
everybody.
yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So as I said before, I'm Kelsey Peterson, Senior City Planner. here at the City of South Burlington. I've been here for 3 years now. And prior to that, I actually worked as a land use and environmental attorney in New Hampshire. And I did that for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years, something like that. And came from a background pre-law, well, in law school on federal Indian law and housing rights and land use and environmental justice things. And before that worked in Nunavut in Canada with the Inuit people and their struggles with the mining companies and sort of the back and forth about we need employment, but we also need to protect our communities. And my undergrad before that was in geological sciences and anthropology. So I'm a bit of a mixed bag. But here I am, and I'm happy to staff this committee and have had a lot of good, I was staffing the Affordable Housing Committee for about a year or so before the merger of the two committees, and very happy to have you all here and to be a resource for you connecting with the rest of the city staff. Okay. On that.
I want to thank Kelsey also for for all her leadership in this, but last year she was working hard, and I think she's still working hard on it now, integrating the new state regs into our zoning and planning.
So that's what just passed. So that's now in place. As of November, it was the adoption date was November 4th. And was fully effective on November 26th or something, like after an appeal period. So those are in place. Anyone who comes in to apply for anything is subject to those rules.
Yeah, that's great. Anyway, last year she brought housing relevant aspects of that to this group for us to react to, and that was really helpful. Helped us learn a lot. I hope we could give her some good feedback on it, which made its way up to sometimes planning and zoning and sometimes to the city council.
Yep.
I think a lot of things that we can do to help is just be good eyes and ears of what's going on in the community. And it's particularly good to have people think about the consequences of what's going on in the city, including regulations and stuff for housing. Because that can't always be first and foremost on everyone's mind, but we can help a little bit with that. We can think about that. I think it's one of the roles of the committee is to kind of lobby for, don't forget the housing, particularly affordable housing, as an aspect of this. So, and Kelsey brings us stuff related and we can give responses, and that's great.
Yep. Great, so I think everyone has seen the charge for the new committee about what, the core of your role is here. It is not, the intention of a charge is to set up the committee and to set up the sort of scope of the committee. It is not a work plan for this year. It is not a list of, a checklist of to-do items, but it's just sort of explaining what the committee is for. So that's something the city council passed this fall, and dissolved the other two committees and created this one. So we're starting with a blank slate, and I'm excited with how the charge broadens the housing committee's role and what can be discussed and what should be focused on, but still keeps the core at affordable housing and economic diversity in housing opportunities. So the next item on the agenda is the beginning of the organizational meeting. So this would be the election of officers and setting of your regular meeting time. So first off, as I noted in the memo, and my intention is for all meetings that you would get this kind of explanatory memo ahead of time instead of just a, one-page agenda. You get a little bit more explanation. You need to elect 3 officers, a chair, a vice chair, and a clerk, and I explained the roles of each. Are there any questions about the roles of those 3 officers? Yeah.
Not the roles.
Okay, and the roles of those officers, pretty clear, pretty standard in this kind of group. So is anyone willing to nominate someone else, nominate themselves? Either one is fine with me.
Has had a chance to talk to Chris about continuing as chair?
Chris does not want to continue as the chair. He is a member of the school board, at this point.
Oh,
So he's got quite a lot on his plate on that side of things. He wants to remain a member of this committee, but chairing is a little beyond and that was true, but even if this had happened, this organizational meeting had happened in June with the previous Affordable Housing Committee. He had expressed then that chairing this and being on that was a little too much.
Okay, good.
I'd like to nominate someone I worked with last year who knows a lot about the subject, and that's Nora as our new chair.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I accept that.
Oh, great.
Awesome.
Excellent.
We can do this two ways. We can either nominate a whole slate and vote for the slate if everybody is unopposed, or we can go one at a time if there's more than one person who is interested in each position. So that is all up to you all. Is anyone else either interested in themselves or wanting to nominate someone else to be chair? Okay, seeing nothing, vice chair, who nominating yourself or others to be vice chair?
Sandy, are you interested in that?
We have a very good picture of you there. Be careful.
I also want you to know I have a gum infection, so my jaw is misshapen. So, sure, I'd be vice chair with Nora. Nora's fabulous, so.
Thanks, Sandy.
Any other interest in vice chair? All right, and nominations or self-nominations for clerk. Clerk is slightly different because you would be taking some notes during the meeting. New city policy is moving towards having all of these meetings recorded if possible. So you would have access to a recording. And when I say notes and minutes, this is not a verbatim situation. This is, here's the agenda items, here are the highlights of what was talked about. If there were any votes on anything, here's what it is. We've prior minutes have been in the 2 to 3 pages range. So it's not a huge lift, but it is a little lift.
I'd be glad to put myself forward because you said that.
Okay, yes, yes.
I've seen minutes that are verbatim discussions, and that is
Okay.
not, in my
No, that
opinion,
is-
what
The
minutes should
the
be.
intention is that the person who is serving as clerk is fully able to participate in the meeting. Taking a few notes as you go, and then, maybe you would go back to the recording if you feel like you missed something, and you would always submit it to me. I can read it over for typos and formatting and all kinds of stuff, and then take it over from there. So Larry has nominated himself. Is anyone else interested or would
Unless
like to?
somebody really wanted to do it.
Yeah, anyone else really?
I just have a question. I thought I heard that state law now requires meetings to be recorded. Is that correct?
Of the statutory bodies, so planning commission, DRB, and city council, but not
Oh, okay.
not us. And the reading that the city attorney has taken of this is that the best practice would be if we are holding a hybrid meeting, which we intend to, that it's very easy just to hit the record button and record the meeting. If for some reason we are unable to hold the hybrid meeting, that doesn't prevent the meeting from occurring like it would for the planning commission or the DRB or the city council. We can still have an in-person only meeting, and conversely, this body can actually have an online only meeting. We're going to try to avoid that, but weather situations or whatever else, that is also an option for this type of advisory committee.
I'm a bad note taker, so.
All right,
Do we
so
need to second this slate?
yes, so the slate as nominated is Nora for chair, Sandy for vice chair, and Larry for clerk. Do I hear a second? Vince has seconded. Any discussion?
I
Votes
can
for?
move that we close nominations.
Yeah, there we go. 4? Votes for?
Yep.
Against? All right, motion passes.
Good group.
But
Thank you very much.
congratulations, everyone. What a
Thank you.
campaign you
What a
ran.
campaign.
This is wonderful.
Well, thank you all.
It's been gripping. Yeah, so Nora, from this point on, here you
Yeah.
go.
So item number 6, or handling of the trust fund, housing trust fund requests. And so the housing trust fund requests were by the small committee, and now that we're the larger, they're molded. Your recommendation is that we just decide it as a full
Yeah.
committee.
That's what my recommendation, partially because as Larry's noted, they are not too frequent to take over the other roles of this committee. And also this committee is not so large that and from my opinion, just staff opinion, that it would justify having a smaller committee, a subcommittee
Right.
address this. So that was just my staff recommendation. You can go whichever way you'd like to on that. But just to be clear, if a housing trust fund request is made, what is the structure of how it's considered? Is it everybody or is it a subcommittee?
I
think
may
given
have been the source of the original recommendation to have a separate subcommittee, but that was within the context of the committee, the former committee being a 10-member committee. And so my view was, why have 10 people work on what 3 people have worked on before? Well, so I'm fine with the 7 people. Because 7 and you know, a quorum would be 4, so I'm fine with the staff recommendation.
Anybody else have a comment or question or thought about it?
Well, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I think that whoever is gonna seek funds will need to make a presentation. And this is a great spot for that to happen. Broader group, different interests or different ideas about how things should, but so that's just, this sounds really, really fine. Should the occasion arise, and I think there will be, I think there's some things percolating. But the piece that I'm a little just don't have an answer to is, how do people find out about the trust fund? Where does a developer go to start the discussion? And that's where the city manager used to staff. They used to have received those initial inquiries. I don't know if you're gonna be doing that.
I likely won't be. That will likely be above my position. So it will still likely be Paul from our office and Jesse,
Okay.
city manager. Paul is the director of planning and zoning, so he's the guy one level up from me.
Well, that's a good point. Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of the discussions especially with developers, especially with reasonably sized projects, about this kind of funding question and what can the city do and all this sort of back and forth
Right.
happens at that level.
Right.
So those will still likely go through Jesse.
And then that request will be made formally, and then it'll come to us with
To
we'll
make
arrange for a presentation, and
Yep.
So that probably means it won't be scheduled at a regular meeting.
I think the effort would be made to schedule at a regular meeting, as it would be the same as when the planning commission or the DRB has somebody come. It's not unusual for people in those positions to be invited to evening meetings.
Yeah.
That said, if there is a more urgent request for any reason, grant funding is running out, project timelines are running out, things like that, there might be the need for a special meeting. But we can kind of cross that bridge when we come to it. And when I said before and we didn't do regular meeting days. Every committee is required to have a regular meeting day in the month, but that can always be changed kind of month to month. But just for the public's planning purposes, you have to have something set.
I'm sorry.
Actually, it's an add-on to, we had a smaller working session that Larry, you brought up, so the criteria for housing trust requests.
Mhm.
And it, from my standpoint, I'll speak for myself, but it did sound like there are a number of nuances to those that it might be helpful to have an educational session
Mhm.
for the entire group. I don't know if you would feel the same way, but the way you talked about it, it sounds like there are criteria that if the entire group is gonna evaluate requests in the future, it would be helpful to have the same baseline.
Yeah, so there are documents that set up the trust fund itself that explain what the money can be used for and what should be considered when making those determinations. I have been able to track down those documents, but it has been recently, and Larry has them as well. So that is something that I would intend to bring at a January meeting to make sure everybody's on the same page with that kind of, what is the trust fund, what is it used for, who can request it, all of those nuts and bolts kinds of things. So when requests come in, everybody's on the same page.
I think we'll have the same kind of discussion about the ARPA money that might be focused on housing. Particularly when CHT requested their money be used for renovation as opposed to new build. So that's a big discussion to have.
Well, but there isn't any ARPA funding. It has to be committed by the end of
Right.
this year, so.
Yeah.
It's done.
There was a proposal made to council Monday and barring, well, we're not meeting again before
Right.
January, so what's on that list is on that list right now.
Okay, great. Okay. So anyway, getting back to the committee, that sounds like a good deal.
Okay. So we will make a motion that we will decide as a full committee any of the Housing Trust Fund requests, and then next meeting, we'll have the documents to review, will be made available so that we can review them on our own.
The intention would be that I would compile the documents and write up a little explainer of it, and we'd be able to put that on the agenda for January. But that is something in January you and I will be in touch about for
Yep.
the next agenda.
Sounds good. So do we need to make a motion?
That would be great.
Somebody want to make a motion that I'll make a motion
Oh.
that, does somebody want a second?
Second.
Okay.
Me, I guess.
Okay, so how's it stands is that, just for you taking notes, is that that we'll decide as a full committee and we'll be apprised of how those decisions are made and that'll be addressed next committee. Dates though, it's just to circle back.
We've got to vote.
Oh,
Motion a second, and now you need to vote.
no vote.
Aye.
Everybody, aye.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Setting regular meeting
Yep.
date and time. So how long is it? It's been for, I mean, at least for this past year, and I think the year before, it's been on the third Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m. Here.
Yep, so when I emailed everybody and asked what worked for everyone, it sounded like Wednesdays are generally the best days. The sticking point is that Chris, who has been recently reappointed by the city council, and my reading of the city council appointing him to this committee is that the council would love him to be able to participate in this committee. So if we can find another day of the month that he would be able to mostly participate, that would be the best case scenario. I got a list from him of the school board meetings through about June. It looks like regularly they meet the first and third Wednesdays. Occasionally that gets moved off by holidays and other things, and so they occasionally meet the second or the fourth, but to me, that's fine to kind of have one-offs that he misses. So my proposal, just looking at that and with all of your emails, would be to move this meeting to the second Wednesday of each month, or the fourth, but.
And that puts us kind of in between city council meetings too, is that?
It's the same, it will generally be the same week as planning commission.
Okay.
So city council is a little interesting because they meet on Mondays.
Mhm.
So Monday, and with it being the first and third Mondays, sometimes they line up with planning commission and sometimes with DRB.
Yeah.
And because of holidays, occasionally they get kicked to Tuesdays and then planning commission gets kicked to Wednesdays. So if that ever happened, I would not be able to staff it because I'm planning commission on the second and fourth weeks.
Okay,
But that should be
rare.
rare. hypothetically, you could, well, no, you can't move it to the first Wednesday. If there's another day of the week that others are also available, that's up to you to discuss. But I would say generally not Mondays because of the city council. Tuesdays are a little difficult because of DRB. It's either the DRB or the planning commission is here in the building. And they often use this room for deliberations or other things. Fridays, nobody wants to do that. So if your options are Wednesdays or Thursdays, which is, and then probably the second or fourth weeks of the month. So you really have 4 days you can pick from.
Can the date be variable? In other words, one month be the third Wednesday, the other month be the second Wednesday. It all depends on the flexibility, of course.
No,
Has to be fixed.
there has to be a fixed published normal day.
Okay.
Where, you know, if that day happens to be the 4th of July on a certain year, like you can move it for that, but generally it should be the same every month.
Is the second Wednesday bad for you?
No, I'm just saying, I mean, if,
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
if it can be
you know?
more creative.
Yeah.
I mean, if the rule is whatever it is, then
How do we feel about Wednesdays versus Thursdays?
Thursdays, I can't because I have
Okay,
a group that ends at 7.
so that's not doable. So Wednesdays, any
narrow it-
preference
narrow
for,
it down to Wednesday
I
then.
know it's Wednesdays, so any preference for the second or fourth Wednesdays?
Eeny, meeny,
I
miny.
prefer the second, but I can do either.
Sandy prefers the second and she's expressing a preference, so would the second Wednesday of the month, moving it from the third up to the second, work for everyone in the room?
'Cause Ryan has
Yeah. The chair should call on the.
oh,
public
I'm sorry.
then When we're done deliberating.
Yeah, is there any more discussion
Yeah,
amongst
that's-
committee members?
That's okay, that's okay. Ryan, just a second, we're just gonna finish this topic out of meeting days. Anybody else have another request, preference? Okay,
Second Wednesday.
second Wednesday?
Second Wednesday.
So second Wednesday of the month from 6 to 8. Does that time still work, 6 to 8? That's what also works for you, correct? Excellent. So, somebody want to make a motion that that's gonna be our meeting time?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Second,
Second.
and
All in favor?
all in favor?
So moved.
All right.
Ryan?
The room you're in now is booked on the second Wednesday at this time, by the way.
Yep, we
That's-
have other rooms and I'm aware of the room schedule, Ryan, thank you.
I should ask before we get too far, is that the Natural Resources Committee? Is that the second Wednesday?
No, they are the
That's
first
First
Wednesday.
Wednesday, right? That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I got too
Too many
involved here.
Wednesdays, yeah.
Yeah, that's the problem when city council's Mondays, planning commission and DRB is Tuesdays. We have a lot of committees that meet on Wednesdays.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. All right.
So number 7 is fiscal year 2025 work plan, review of the city council policies, priorities, strategies, and decide on a work plan for the remainder of fiscal year 2025. How are we doing on time? Doing excellent. Does everybody have the agenda in front of them? So I don't need, okay, excellent. So I mean, we haven't met since June. And so our time in terms of what we can accomplish and address has been narrowed, but in terms of the bullet points, any of the housing related fiscal 2025 or the hosting any housing related events during Fair Housing Month, we have plenty of time to do that. And brainstorm and advocate for housing related topic issues or tasks to be included. So any ideas or recommendations about what we would maybe add to any of those parts?
So I'm reading this again. It would seem that a good kickoff for this committee would be the best introduction that we could pull together of the situation of housing in South Burlington. What is the rate of housing growth over the last 20 years? If we knew anything about the housing stock, but of course we don't know as much as we'd like, unless we ask for recommended a housing inventory, but an analysis of the housing stock to the extent that we know. I saw a chart recently on the huge change in single dwelling units to multiple dwelling units and rentals and so forth. That's a kind of statistic, the kind of information would be great to have. Maybe Kelsey could brief us on what are the big changes of Act 47 that have impinged on us, make things different. I've always wanted to just have some brainstorming time to talk about, you know, after we hear all of this, what are the types of things we do in South Burlington that make housing easier and more affordable, and what are the types of things we do that impede it? And of course, we have to impede it. We don't have it completely, you know, we do have planning and zoning regulations, so something has to be done. But it would kind of be nice to start the year with that type of educational effort that we can all take part in. Do you understand what I mean? Just kind of an overview of where we are in 2024. What can we look for in 2025? And in seeing that, I'm sure we all say, here's something I think we ought to work on more, and thus we can develop our the work plan from some of that. But puts all the issues on the table as much as we can. And I don't want to call upon Kelsey to say, would you do this for us? Because I think we can all contribute something to that. That makes sense to other people?
So I'm hearing a couple of things out of that. First is a general update on the status of the current status of the housing market and the housing availability in South Burlington. And then, which includes both sort of statistics, number like what percentage is multifamily, what percentage is single family, what is being built now, things like that. I can pull that together fairly quickly, so that's not a problem. And then some guidance on the changes that have occurred to the LDRs. I can also do that because they're all in here now. So, and those would both be at a fair, I can absolutely do that at a fairly high level. Just, you know, there's a lot of changes that happen to the LDR, so going through every single one of them would be it wouldn't be boring. But sort of the high level changes, what are the big systemic changes in the regulations? Very happy to do that. I think, I mean, it makes a big sort of presentation meeting for me, but doing those two things and then the sort of guidance documents from the Housing Trust Fund, kind of background presentation, that can all happen in the same meeting as kind of a background kickoff foundational meeting for everybody to be on the same page. And then leaving space for discussion. What are you seeing? What are the challenges that you've heard about? Like, what are you hearing from other people? What are you noticing yourself, et cetera? It's just me restating what you said.
Sure.
Kelsey, are there any other studies that have been done that I was thinking, I got a copy several months ago about the Vermont Housing Needs Assessment, and it breaks it down to the county. I don't remember if it went to the town level or not. But one is sort of, are there other third-party studies that are done that either can be tied out to our own information or might enhance information that the city doesn't have?
There hasn't been a study of like sort of a housing needs assessment that goes down to the municipal level, as far as I know. The RPC has done some work on this. So the RPC is the Regional Planning Commission. So our RPC is the Chittenden County RPC, and there's I think there's 10 RPCs in the state for the 14 counties, so some get kind of combined. They have done some work on housing needs. They are also tasked with working up some housing targets for their member municipalities. So that's something that's ongoing, but that is part of the Act 47, Act 181 landscape. So I can pull together some of that regional information, but there's not really any third-party study of South Burlington in particular.
So CHT just released their countywide housing progress. Perhaps there's some information there that it'd be interesting to know, I think, what's being built here, what's being built in our versus what's happening in the county. Just for informational.
Absolutely.
I
That's
think,
part of the
I
broader-
think you're referring to the report on building homes together.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Yep.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
just,
something that RPC is related to.
I totally support what Vince has, proposed. If maybe people want to discuss that more, I just had something else to ask about. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Well, Kelsey put some things that are in the city council's PPS. So I'm wondering, the second and third, the promoting housing development about updating permitting and development fees. And the second one, review and adjust fire life safety ordinances and resources. That second one would relate to Ryan's concern, I think, but are they on the city council's timetable between now and the end of the fiscal year that it would be timely for us to, look at that, see what's happening and weigh in, or have they already been dealt with, or what's the situation with those two?
I believe that the first is kind of ongoing at the staff level with Steve Locke and Jesse and Paul, working on some of the questions about fees. And I don't know the status of any different adjustments to the fire and life safety ordinances, but those are both things that are on the FY25 policy priorities and strategies list. I don't have any information about whether further discussion of them has been scheduled. I can definitely check with Jesse about any status of those things, but unless Elizabeth knows anything
Yeah,
different.
I don't have any additional detail, but I know I did have a conversation with Steve the other day about the
Steve
current
Locke
one.
is our deputy city manager and fire chief.
And he's some other.
Yeah, right.
General guy.
Yeah, general guy. He's the go-to guy. But the rental registry that's in place right now has had a focus on the short-term rentals through organizations like Airbnb and VRBO, and that is some poll data that you can get through listing agencies. So it is easier for South Burlington to start with identifying through those third-party sites those property owners who may be renting short-term rentals. So those are ones where you can sort of proactively contact and do inspections and things like that. The second area, I asked about just rented units by homeowner. I mean, there's some obvious large facilities that are rental units by nature, by business, and filed that way. So that is also known information. But what I was told was that as this evolves and as inspections are being done and as information is being gathered, that other venues like a Craigslist or Zillow or something might become avenues for getting information on listed rental opportunities within South Burlington, and then that could become more proactive. So there's sort of a push and a pull where there's volunteer folks who own rental units who have volunteered information for the rental registry and the inspections that are largely fire and safety related. And then there'll be sort of a pull, which will be, identifying through different sources, areas that could add to the inspection and the rental registry as well. So that's the sense I got for how that is evolving in terms of building that database. I don't know if you've heard anything different than that.
And the database is a database of just all types of rental units or just the short-term rental? What are we hoping for in terms of the
I
data?
believe it will be both. That's
Both,
what I-
okay.
Yeah, I'll clarify that, but I believe it is
Yeah.
intended to be both
Both,
with a, primary emphasis because of the visibility and the concern for housing stock on the short term.
okay. And then the other thing, I'm wondering if this was included in the discussion, is there currently a mechanism or a way for renters to request that they're, because sometimes there's the fire and safety difficulty that's, that the renters are experiencing and then they're not living in a safe housing condition, so.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. but-
Yeah, but that would be, I feel like that would be something like how would we develop a mechanism so that if you felt you were living in an unsafe environment, or there were safety violations that you could report and/or.
I remember talking about that last year, and I think there was some mechanism for it.
Okay.
To be anonymous also, so there's no retribution from
Exactly,
an
yeah.
angry landlord. Short term is less than 30 days.
I believe so, yeah.
Oh, really? Even like a 3-month rental is
Mhm.
considered long-term?
Yeah,
I don't
It's
wanna
a-
commit to knowing that detail.
My understanding is it's related to the tipping point on landlord-tenant
Yeah.
laws.
Mhm.
So any stay of 30 days or less, you're not a tenant. So all the eviction protections and other things don't apply, and above that, in Vermont, above that, it would. So that's the tipping point that they selected for short term.
Curious.
yeah, this is interesting. but-
So with regard to the work plan, I know I see these things on here. I'm not sure what a lot of these really mean
Sure.
in terms of what our role was.
Well, yeah, to be totally.
Increasing community gardens, it's actually on the Natural Resources Committee as well.
Correct, yeah, so this is the city council's policy priorities and strategies list. Other committees had the opportunity to develop a work plan that, through the summer and fall, it was a little delayed, it should be in the summer, it was in the fall. That kind of picks out like, here's the thing that's on the council's work plan and here's what we're going to do as a committee to work towards it. So none of these individual items are fully on this committee. The committee has an opportunity to help the council and advise the council on how to work toward accomplishing these things. So they are a little broad, some are a little bit vague, and some have involvement with more than one committee. To be completely honest as well, there is not a lot on this fiscal year's PPS that is directly on housing. So when you get down to me listing like community gardens, I was scraping for all the things that were housing and,
It's a great idea.
life experience, quality of life for housing, people in housing related. So
I don't see dog parks.
you're correct.
Kelsey, is there a schedule to have this committee present an updated work plan to council?
There's not. My understanding is because of sort of the short year that we're in, the intention is really get the housing committee rolling, do this kind of background, intro stuff, discussion, get everybody moving. If you choose to do any events in April for Fair Housing Month, that will take meeting time as well. And then position this committee well to advocate for things to end up on the FY26 PPS. So I can ask Jesse if that's something you would like to do, is present a work plan, but my understanding is with the shortened timeline is do things that can get this committee rolling, do anything that you can think of that you would like to do to move the needle on any of this, but not something formal.
Yeah, and I just think that would be important to clarify, if this document starts to circulate, that it is really the sum of a higher level of parts
Yes.
that were identified in kind of a master strategic priorities and policies,
Yeah.
and not a grassroots effort by this committee. But that would be something I would hope this committee would wanna have input in for next year at a minimum.
Yep. So just as a just laying it all out there, you have effectively 6 meetings, because you meet monthly between now and the end of the fiscal year. So if you're talking about one being a sort of foundational background meeting, last year, the April meeting was replaced by events. So instead of having another formal meeting like this, it was encouraging members to attend the events for Fair Housing Month that were set up. So that's an option for you as well. If you do any events for Fair Housing Month this year, either you'd have a subcommittee or you'd spend another meeting February or March or both setting up those events. So and then my recommendation would that you allocate a meeting sort of to have this kind of discussion to really set up well for FY26 and to advocate to City Council of what you want to be doing during FY26. So there's very few meetings to play with here.
We also have some openings on this committee, don't we?
No, we don't.
Oh, this is the full committee.
This is the full well, Chris is not here, but other than that, this is a
7.
full 7.
7 committees. Okay, good.
Yep.
Big 7.
The big 7.
I was on the second page or third page of Kelsey's memo. I don't know what the Vermont Homes for All toolkit is. I don't know if people would be interested in. That would be a learning opportunity if people are interested.
Yeah, I don't know the equity and planning toolkit either. Both of those I'm curious about.
Yeah, so the equity and planning, and I'll get back to the Homes for All in a second, Sandy. The equity and planning toolkit is an effort that we've been doing for about a year. We have a state grant to do that project. Kicked it off about a year and a half ago to develop a structure for public outreach that is more equitable and moving towards more inclusiveness than, meetings at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday. So that is still, we're moving into the final stages of that, and the intention is that we'll have at the end a report that explains everything in a lot of policy words and background, and then a usable sort of group of worksheets and templates and step-by-step flow charts about how do you identify who's affected, and how do you reach the people who are most effective, and how do we reach the people who are most affected and have been underrepresented, and what are the barriers to their participation, and how do you motivate people, even if you remove the barriers, to then participate. So it's a big network of things, and the intention is we're wrapping that up, and hopefully that will be done. I would hope in January. So that's something that we'd be able to implement as a committee if you do public outreach about anything, or even in publicizing the events that you hold. Like, how do you publicize? How do you get feedback on events? All sorts of different things. So that the committee's role in that is more using the toolkit and being, partially because I'm the lead on that project, the opportunity for this committee to be a leader in using it and demonstrating to other committees and other people in the city like how to use it and how to use it well. I would love for you guys to be a bit of a trailblazer. That's a good word. Yes, please. So that was that. The Vermont Homes for All toolkit is a book about this. I would call it a booklet, but it's about that thick. Resource developed by the state. It might have been VHCD. Now DHCD. Now I'm getting myself confused. But it is partially how to streamline regulations as an option for, you want to build an ADU. Here's a set of plans that are approvable, and you get fast-tracked approval if you build to those plans. It's that kind of thing. So that is something that is on the, if we get time to do it or to talk about it, list for City Council, but it is a very housing related thing. Happy to circulate the copies of that and point people to more resources about it, but Sandy's right, that is a bit of a me presentation for background, and then your role would be discussing it. What are the parts that you would use, what would you advocate for in South Burlington, what makes sense in South Burlington's context? Cause some of it's about, farmhouse conversions and things like that that are not as applicable. So that's that.
I think maybe Addison County Regional Planning has something like that. I know they have something on ADUs on their website.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it's like as, for a lot of housing situations.
Right.
But they have a very nice ADU, that's something that we could actually also target underneath that kind of heading is, how, Homes for All, how to, do a bunch of things.
If it's open enough to talk about some general points about the work plan, may I?
Mhm.
And just-
Oh, I'm not the chair, nor is the chair.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm the staff.
Yeah. I'm thinking about when we've gotten a good public interest in housing issues. And we've had a couple of Fair Housing Month book discussions in the library, co-sponsored with the library, that have received 20 or more. Not all of them, but some 20 or more participants who that read the book and wish to discuss it, and those have been very well received. Marla Keene also did a presentation on ADUs that I think had more than 20 people and a lot of enthusiastic interest in it. And I'll bet we got some ADUs out of it that wouldn't have happened if Marla had taken that initiative, which was
For everybody, Marla is the senior development planner. So she's the me on the other side, on the zoning side. I'm the planning side, she's the zoning side.
Are you
So
talking about-
she leads the development review, like someone comes in with an application, how does that get reviewed, and she staffs the DRB.
Yeah, I think I had like 50 people last year. It was bursting at the seams. You're talking
Yeah.
about that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a third event that wasn't, well, it was co-sponsored by this group, I guess, was when the, who was it? Coming up with the new master plan, they had to do a segment on housing. And so they put out feelers, all kinds of groups for anyway, the discussion for housing, the input from the public on housing packed this room with perhaps 50 people. There is no other item, no other subsection of the master plan, I think I'm saying
The
this
city
all right,
plan.
that got as many people as the housing one. We got angry people about the lack of housing or difficulties with housing, renter problems, and all sorts of things. But anyway, when you get good turnouts like that for all of those things, you want to continue to do them. So somehow, I'd like to see our plan appeal to more people than 5 or 10 people who are interested in policy, but really are the people who make things happen. And by the way, if anyone has any good housing books before we go to the January meeting, we ought to spread them, let people know. I'd particularly like to know, because I've helped with several of the book discussions in the library. Can you think of some really good housing books that we might use for a discussion? Should we do it in April? And if we don't do it in April, that's fine. I'd still like to read the book.
Yeah, what books did you do before?
We did Fixer Upper, which was particularly good. Last year, what was one?
Homelessness is a
Homelessness is a housing
problem.
problem.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was really good.
right. Oh, and we teamed up with Jessie? No, that's not-
Jessie Hyman at CVOEO. She's their
Thank-
she's their
thank you.
housing person.
Thank you,
Yes,
thank you.
Yeah.
And that was very helpful also. So we've had several of these that have been good.
I think our first one was The Color of Law.
Ah,
That's
excellent,
it.
excellent. Yes,
Yeah, I'm surprised you guys haven't done Evicted. I feel like that was the start of,
almost.
housing.
Almost. We talked about Evicted
yeah.
and doing that. Superior book. Yeah.
And I think, I think her name is Bess O'Brien. Did she do a housing related movie this year, documentary? She often does.
Yeah.
And what was that?
She did, I can't recall.
I can't recall the movie because I did not see it, but I'm wondering if, I'll have to look at her website. I'm wondering if, I mean, that's always an option too,
Sure.
is a movie and discussion. It's a little more bigger time commitment, but
Yeah.
that, you know,
And
you could
that-
show up, right? You know, as opposed to having to
Those
kind of,
kind of venues are being sponsored, like screenings of movies. I know the Quietest Year, I can't remember the exact title, but on noise pollution is being,
Yeah.
if it hasn't happened already. I had seen it in another location, but.
I
so-
think Bess's movie is just getting by, and the city or somebody
did sponsor it.
somebody sponsored it last May. Not that it shouldn't be shown again, but it was shown. I don't know if it's the school or the city or the Rotary or somebody sponsored it.
Do we have the capacity to show a movie?
We have an auditorium.
Do we have a movie? Can they show a movie?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. Have a screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that big screen, that big.
Mhm.
It's all done on.
Who's
You
gonna
don't
bring
need
the
a
popcorn?
projector, you don't need a
Yeah.
projector and a screen anymore. I should
Gotta bring
realize
the
that.
popcorn.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering if, and I don't know, I don't know whether it speaks to any of the items on here. I'm just kind of thinking of this as Vince was talking about, engaging the public, right? And these are high degree of engaging public events. But, if there's a way to take some of these concerns that we receive, right, or that seem to be, and put it in a housing frame and maybe write an article for the other paper or write a guest thing of just like, this is what this means. This is why it's important, you know, in terms of in service of housing, right? And just really, because a lot of those issues kind of get, things often get presented in a very binary way and rather than a more educative, you know, like, hey, this is what this all means. And this is this is the downstream effect of this type of thing, and this is the downstream effect of this, but just, and not have it connected to a controversy, just putting it, you know, out there of like how to help people so that when the controversies arise, if they do, that people are forming opinions from less emotionally, like from more factual basis.
Mhm.
That require work on the committee, but yeah.
And I don't know if this showed up in the potential work, but the translation of the LDRs into sort of what does this mean for you?
Yeah,
That might be something that could be completed in that 6-meeting time frame. I don't know, but that could probably not for April, but could turn into an educational opportunity for the community.
I love that idea, Elizabeth. How about, just brainstorming here, I'm sorry I got us off on this, but it's fun. Who are the people most interested in the LDRs? Maybe instead of the general public, I wonder if we could get a group of builders, developers, prospective builders, contractors, to kind of give them not that, you know, we could do it, not that I could do it, I mean, she probably could, but how are the LDRs of South Burlington different than other communities? If you want to build in South Burlington, here's what you have to do. Like Marla did on the affordable housing thing for people who might be interested in affordable housing. So maybe something broader on something like that. I think that would be really nice. More and more I've been talking to people who build and have had experience with it, and they're just floored at how complicated it is. So maybe an educational opportunity for the people who make things happen. you know, like your organization, but they know on all of that stuff. And maybe they'd be the people to say, here's how you do affordable housing. And you might only get a handful of people there. I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud. But it might be important because some of these developments, like the one off Kennedy Drive, hundreds of units came from that, and they did a good job following the LDRs.
I like where you're going with that is instead of going and trying to get the whole public educated, being really strategic about who needs to know and yeah, a really usable resource for that group. Yeah, I like that idea.
I have a slightly different topic in terms of something to learn about. Elizabeth, you can help us with this. It has to do with the ARPA money and how it's been either not spent on the housing work that we did, or how it's been redefined. And that would be a good thing for council to let us know, because at that last meeting, that 400,000 was, I think, assigned to us in a, I think you brought that up, as in a bidding, you know, let's reopen that up and so we should probably learn about what that really means, if that's still available.
Yeah, well, I think it won't be available through ARPA funding because that criteria has passed. But I mean, those were questions I had at the time. And frankly, that process, I had a lot of questions when that came up, that to go 2 years, you know, and get down to the last month of the ARPA funding be available and hear back from the CHT that we no longer have the capacity. And that was not just infrastructure in Dorset Commons, it was 16 units of housing. It was 8 duplexes, my understanding was. So, and the project got described as shovel ready, which, you know, I'll be the first to say, I don't know what shovel ready really means, but I have a thought of what it means, which is breaking ground. Yeah, that felt like too long of a time frame to disconnect between being awarded that funding and then basically having it handed back in less than a month before the city had an opportunity to potentially have a committed contract and meet the federal guidelines. So it won't be those funds, but and the CHT sort of talked about, and they had no specificity, but wanted to look at weatherization opportunities at Dorset Common at the same property. So a completely different application of funds that they might be looking for support, but no detail with that at this point. So anyway, those were questions I had, because I came into that really the 11th hour as a counselor, and those would be the questions I would be asking anybody around that kind of opportunity.
So Larry, you're asking us, like, could we have on the agenda kind of like be more formally briefed about like what's the plan around
The update, you know, the review of how the money was allocated, what the results. I know Summit built their buildings.
Yeah.
What's remaining, and there is some attempt evidently to change that focus, try to keep the money and being spent under different.
Well, one, it had to be committed contracts, and the criteria by default, nobody wanted to put it into any recurring funds because you basically, you know, end up taxing the budget next year. So the criteria basically became one-time capital expenses where you could get a committed contract in this calendar year and spend the funds by 2026 were the criteria. So that those funds could offset, could have served and did to some degree offset what might have been multi-year annual budget operating expenses going forward. So that may be where there might be surplus opportunities in the future, but the goal was to not, you know, kind of buy down the tax rate by eliminating any recurring expenses that might occur. But I think also the fund itself, Kelsey or Nora, is really understanding, because the Housing Trust Fund will get a bolus of funding this year and has an outstanding balance as well. So there are current funds there too. And I don't know how this group would choose to promote those, or is it just is this group a receiving body for requests? But I don't think those funds have been touched in a couple of years, right?
No. Do you have an idea what the balance is?
I don't.
Yeah.
No, there's, I had an idea at one point, but there's been changes in what has been going in and I haven't kept up with it, but
So
I can-
balance, so idea what the balance is would be
Mhm.
handy.
Yep.
just to know.
So another sort of work task item would be to kind of get a fuller picture and then maybe promote how we might promote the housing fund so that it
Okay.
gets,
If
It's
that's a
done.
role of ours, right?
yeah, it would, that seems like it would be a good, because otherwise it's just sitting there.
Right.
And
I think you asked a good question, Larry, at that meeting, which is, would weatherization, which meets city plan goals,
Right.
be covered in the legalities of a housing trust fund?
Right, yeah.
does anybody else have an idea or question or comment about some of the ones listed? Or housing related issue that you feel like the committee should be focusing on in the work plan?
When I talk to different people, there's sometimes a sense, right, wrongly, but there's sometimes a sense that Burlington, South Burlington doesn't want, is not interested in more housing. And we know that's not true, and I liked the whereases that were in the establishing the housing committee. We lacked a housing committee to support broad city goals, of increasing housing stock. Yeah, that's positive. That's a broad city goal. Continually improving housing and decreasing cost across a large range of income levels. And elsewhere it talks about supporting city efforts to provide educational information on housing topics to the public. No, sorry, that's redundant, but the bullet before it, be it resolved that the city council establish South Burlington for the purposes advising the city on potential policies, programs, and regulatory updates to promote, encourage, and incentivize investments in housing, including affordable housing, workforce housing, and housing affordable to middle income residents to foster an economically diverse community. I'll bet there are a lot of people who say, what, the city actually supports more housing? I thought they were trying to reduce the amount of housing. Maybe it's just the people I've been talking to lately, but that's incorrect. This is what is correct. So maybe we ought to somehow think about how we can communicate this better to the public and change the reputation of the committee. And we do support more housing. Less expensive housing, all sorts of stuff. This is a very positive statement that I think would surprise some people.
And that's for the city of Burlington?
The South Burlington.
Oh, the South
Yeah,
Burlington.
it's for South Burlington, yeah. We're pro-housing.
Can you read that last part again, just out loud about the policies? I mean, there is a policy. I mean, are there, besides kind of a few of the items here around, fire safety ordinances, and are there any policy areas that the committee that feel in line, I guess, with these PPS ones that we would like to take up?
Okay, I'll read it again. Now, therefore be it resolved that the city council establishes South Burlington Housing Committee for the purposes of, number one, advising the city on potential policies, programs, and regulatory updates to promote, encourage, and incentivize investment in housing, including affordable housing, workforce housing, housing affordable to middle income residents, to foster an economically diverse community. I like that goal. I'm proud of our city for articulating that. And but then it certainly isn't very obvious to the public, I don't think. Maybe it's just because all the stuff I read in the other paper seems to be so negative.
Well, and that's kind of.
May
what
I?
Yeah, go ahead, Sandy.
I was very distressed by the guest perspective last week that said more housing, more students, higher taxes. And I would really like it, to me, it would be beautiful if the school board chair and the city council chair work together to write a response to that and rebut it. It really needs to, I mean, if our leadership needs to show up and promote housing when something like that appears in the other paper, and also not just to respond, but to do things pro housing. I don't know if that was discussed last night, I mean Monday night, Elizabeth, but that kind of, we shouldn't have any more housing because it'll be more kids and more higher taxes, should not go unanswered by our city leadership on the school side and the city side, in my personal opinion.
Just for an FYI, I've drafted a response to that. I hope it'll go in either the next issue or the one after that. But I think it would be best coming from leadership level.
Well, plus you. I mean, more than them is, or more than you is great.
No, yeah, who am I? No, we need our leaders to step up.
Well, and I think, I think back to that kind of like, there's a lot of things going out into the media and the world that is very anti-housing and creating false binaries, right? So the false binary is you can't have housing and you can, and I think, I don't know if this is a task that our committee wants to take up, but putting more information into that sphere of, rather than that sphere just consistently getting grabbed by it's just continually grabbing the headlines, and they are shaping a narrative. And so I think it takes time to build a narrative, but I think a piece could be every once in a while us building a more optimistic, facts-based, pro-housing information, so that we're not just on defense responding to whatever flame got thrown into the bait.
One committee I hear that's very proactive with that, and I think we've all seen that, is the Energy Committee.
The Energy Committee is putting out stuff. Yeah.
So that opportunity to push information in an educational way, I think they're a great example of a committee that has done that.
I was really only reaching the people that read, the other paper, but all these things can just we just want to move the needle, right? In these discussions, so that we can kind of bring down the temperature, right?
I think the Economic Development Committee is trying also.
Yeah.
Well, we do have a communications person on staff, don't we, Jesse?
Andy.
City? Yeah.
Andy is our communications manager, yes.
Right, and I mean, it seems like he could work with the city manager, and there's, I assume, a communications person at the school department. We have some people power to support this kind of public education.
I would say yes, using the resources of staff and the communications and outreach manager for public education that's accurate for sure. I think it would be up to city council to do any specific kind of political response. That's not something that the staff would be able to do on their own. And I don't, like, apart from, Vince publishing his own piece, the position of the city has to come from city council. Political position of the city, would say. But factual, you're allowed to have an ADU, can be published by staff, and educational materials along those lines can be produced by this committee, and if you prioritize which topics you'd want to work on, I'm happy to support you in doing that and all that sort of stuff.
Thank you.
Sure.
I get your point about staff I think of housing as, and just like I think of energy or climate as policy and not political, but anyway, I
Yeah.
can see why there might be some gray area in what staff could, but in my view, I'm talking about a fact-based response, but also a reference to the fact that our city plan does endorse and looks toward more housing as part of the city's future for a whole bunch of reasons.
Yeah.
Economic development, anyway.
I think personally, to discuss not having more children in a town, it's just, we're all not gonna be here much longer. So we need to have some children or some of us, not everybody, but some of us are like, we're getting there. So that was the offense I took with John's article. It's like, we gotta have more kids in the city. We can't not have more kids. Or we won't have much of a city.
Yeah,
Is John's article like an op-ed?
Yeah.
That was published?
yeah.
I have a goal for myself. I wanna write an op-ed at some point because I think they're really cool. I had to do it this semester for an assignment, but writing's not my strong suit, but my organization is having an internal training in May that's focused on how we talk about affordable housing to get more buy-in. And I was just Googling, there's a website, the Housing Narrative Lab, that does research specifically on how do you frame this so that it's more effective. I'll keep you guys posted on like if I find it valuable, maybe that's something that we could bring here, and
Great.
I know myself, I wanna learn that a little bit better so.
Excellent.
Mhm.
No, I think that's great, because again, that if we accept the language of the narrative, then we're not taking it as active a role to shape it.
Yes.
So from a scheduling perspective, it feels like there's a lot of appetite in the room to do public education and outreach work, especially now for various reasons. Is the committee interested in events, additional education publishings, anything else related to Fair Housing Month in April? And how much committee time and should be allocated to that in the next few meetings? Because I love the talking about big things. I'm just trying to keep us figuring out what's the goal from now till June.
So I think last year, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess I'm only looking at Vince and Sandy then. We were like, wait, who was here last year? I wanna say we kind of, well, and I think, right, you would have been here. I wanna say January, we really got into like hammering, really formulating a very clear plan for Fair Housing Month, right? Because we were really jumping into the planning of at least the ADUs at that point.
Right.
So I think that's gotta be on the agenda for next month, I would suspect. I don't know, and do we wanna do something? We have had at least 2 events last 2 years, right? We had the book each year, and then we did the ADU, a larger event. But those take some planning and effort. So even if it'll be the second week in January, even if we don't have if we have a subcommittee that's gonna kind of be pointed into a direction that we form, I think it'll still be enough time to do something for Fair Housing Month. But I would advocate it being on the agenda next.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's a good tradition to be a part of that, and the library publicizes it, and we want to stay active in it. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
I'd like to do something.
yeah.
And it's good, just like Kelsey said, kind of give us a deadline or some kind of structure to work towards. April's kind of a good timeline.
So that's one thing that would be on our work agenda, Fair Housing Month for a meeting. Of the things that people talked about, the update around the housing trust and promoting, how we're gonna promote it, what's happened with the money, both, and how much do we have? So there's a really a housing trust discussion that should be an agenda item. Just kind of summarizing the ones that people have brought up. Another idea of what do the LGRs mean for you? So I guess it's, a lot of things can be lumped under the education, like you said. So would there be a meeting to kind of formulating a plan for how do we want to do education and outreach? What do you all think? And that could be a meeting topic as well. And then, so does that encapsulate enough of what you described, Vince? Okay.
Then we have the education one you mentioned.
Self-education for our
Yep,
committee, right?
It's self-education, yep.
We have the one Kelsey said at the end of the year where we're planning for 2026.
So I think
I think that would be great to be the May meeting.
May meeting,
And I'm happy for that to include sort of an overview of City Plan 2024.
okay,
So city plan, the city plan, every municipality in the state, if they want to be able to do their own zoning and things, has to have a municipal plan. It's good for 8 years, so it's a long-range planning document, long-ish. And the intention is that you're outlining the 8 years that are setting up sort of 20 or 30 years. So that process was completed it was adopted by City Council last January. So that's where the PPS, the policy priorities and strategies that the City Council addresses each fiscal year is coming from, is from what's in that big document for the next 8 years. So for discussion of what does this committee want to be working on for the next fiscal year, sort of July to June. Happy to sort of take that step back and say, like, this is what, and Sandy and Vince have mentioned it in this discussion, you know, the city and the city council's adopted this policy document for the next 8 years, and it encourages housing, and it wants to, you know, increase the vacancy rate, and there's housing related goals. So I'm happy to put that into that meeting of, here's a city plan, here's what's in it. What do you want to do? What do you want to pick out of that to advocate the city council puts on it?
But not in January.
No, May.
Okay, right, okay.
yeah.
Is that master plan called the municipal plan?
It's in statute, it's called the municipal plan. We call it City Plan 2024 because we're a city.
Is
Master
there-
planning is when someone has a big property and they have to
Thank you.
decide what they're doing with the whole property, even
yeah.
if they're only developing a bit of it. Yeah.
Kelsey, are there any opportunities you would anticipate for the housing committee to interact with other committees in the next 6 months?
Yeah, so we have some housing related stuff coming, a little bit housing related. The most housing related thing that the planning commission is addressing in the next little while is what kind of housing is or should be allowed to support businesses. We had a request about 1.5 years ago for a large employer they wanted to add sort of temporary housing for their workers and for clients or trainees to come in, and they weren't allowed to do that because of the zoning district they're in. And part of the push and pull is if you allow housing on a sort of per square foot basis is often much more valuable for developers than commercial space. So if you full allow housing in a commercial area, it'll just become housing. So the balance between economic development and economic vitality versus allowing temporary housing, some amount of housing. So that's something the planning commission will be dealing with in the next couple months. So that wouldn't be something that would be open for you to discuss in January, but somewhere in the February, March timeframe, I would say. Provide some feedback.
Recommendations, is that appropriate?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, there's currently a request out to the Economic Development Committee about what kinds of supporting uses do modern businesses need to support them, like,
Do it legally.
well,
Okay.
Provide housing legally.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
that's,
Start
yes,
there.
start with that, but also meeting our vehicle miles traveled reduction goals by letting a deli go into Tech Park.
Right.
Sort of small scale things, like people go to work and they
Yeah.
need to be able to go get a sandwich without having to drive 4 miles. So stuff like that is what the Economic Development Committee's been asked to think about, like what are those kinds of uses? So the housing wrinkle of it, we can bring to you as well.
What about any of the housing, I don't wanna say weighing in on or engaging in around the park master plan, because, a park is what often, is really integral to a neighborhood, so, which is us too. So, is that something that we would want to, as a committee, kind of approach from a housing, because it's kind of like neighborhood promotion,
Yeah, I'll say, so first that the open space and parks and open space master plan is being run from on the staff side by DPW from the Public Works Department and Rec and Parks Department. And I am involved as part of the team. But it hasn't really gotten started. So I think sort of in the time frame we're talking about, there might not be a lot to get involved with, but I'm very happy to keep you all in the loop about what's going on with that. Yeah.
okay.
I think there's gonna be quite a lot of public participation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of the discussion, so
Yeah.
that's probably where
Yeah,
more than likely you'll have a chance to. And I can keep you apprised of
Yeah.
that, so, because
great.
I'll be, that's the other hat, the other side of the other committee. That's gonna be a big focus of our work, is trying to get the open space part of it into the masters. It's such interesting, open space and park master planning, we had to really yell to get it merged. Because it wasn't gonna be, the Parks Department wants to have their parks have master plans. That doesn't necessarily mean it's always open space.
Right.
But so it's merged and.
Nor would there be any interest in the group getting an update maybe in that same April-May timeframe on the rental registry and sort of safe housing?
That would be excellent,
Good.
yeah. Because there would be data by then, right? Is
Yeah,
that- Yeah. Okay, so that could go under May. So just thinking for the January, we have your housing planning, your update of the state of the housing, is that enough for January to for us to cover in January? I'm thinking, because the planning around fair housing is gonna take some effort in terms of what do we wanna do, what do we wanna focus on? And then February, March, we have to, how nailed down do you want this at this point?
Oh, we don't need to be super
Okay.
nailed down, just
Okay.
what are your priorities for the next handful of meetings? I would say, do you want to, for the Fair Housing Month planning, in prior years, there's been a subcommittee and then there's been the full committee. It has worked. I think the guidance from the beginning needs a lot of input from the full committee. So I'm happy for that to be most of the meeting in January. And then kick the sort of background meeting, the foundational, like, this is what's on the LDR stuff a little bit further. Just
Meeting
to,
should
just
be over by 8. Okay,
for February.
okay, yep, bye-bye.
So were you gonna do the LDR, so
So I was
the
the
state of
housing,
housing.
sort of state of the housing at a high level, like not
Not
super
the, not
specific.
and then the fair housing, and I think that's good, that should cover us.
The LDRs and the housing, well, I mean, I was saying maybe move what I was gonna do to the February meeting and dedicate all of the January meeting to really establishing what you wanna do for Fair Housing Month. I don't know if that's too much.
Unless there's some action that we don't know about on the land trust side, I mean, the housing trust side,
Right,
that, you know, that's
yep, there
bubbling
always
out
needs
there
to be
that we don't
some
know about.
space, yeah.
Well, would you envision your being like 15, 20 minutes? So how long do you envision your updating?
I mean, I can fill whatever bucket you'd like me to fill about this topic.
Because I think it would be a good, I think it might inform sort of some of our next sort of thinking about what to do next. So, I mean, I guess I'd throw this out to the whole group. Do you want to spend the 2 hours on all fair housing? Or, because that's gonna get narrowed into a subcommittee work. And then, would it be helpful to have 15, 20 minutes in the beginning to have Kelsey kind of update us? Because I thought that was a good idea on Vince's part, and then it kind of gets everybody's juices rolling. And it might even get our juices rolling for what we want to do for fair housing,
True.
Sure.
I think 15, 20 minutes is quite short.
Okay, do you want it more?
Yeah.
So
How many
let's say,
things are we asking you to present
Lots.
on at this point? LDRs. the
LDRs,
Trust Fund,
Housing trust fund.
the statistics on where we
Yeah.
are with the
We've
stock.
mentioned sort of additional information from the RPC, some other
Yeah.
stuff, like
I imagine
it's,
maybe we could break that up a little bit.
Yeah.
yeah,
happy to.
yeah, so if we can topically, if we want to break it up to just
Maybe the very,
the state of the housing.
the very foundational state of the housing
Mhm.
and what is the housing trust fund? Like very basic,
Yeah,
what are the
Yeah.
things you gotta do? Housing and trust fund.
Yeah.
Yes.
and then we can kind of do those other ones
Yep.
okay. Um,
Excuse me, let me add, wait, on that. Well, I think of that, I hadn't thought before, and I was talking about the distribution of housing within the city also is very important. I mean, we're not a city with homogeneous neighborhoods. And we hear a lot that a lot of the open space conservation areas are all from one neighborhood. And that's an important allegation. The southeast quadrant is very different than the other sections of the city. And there's talk about going to a ward system because the neighborhoods are so different. And so a distribution of housing by neighborhoods would also be very interesting. If that's easy, but they're radically different.
What's helpful is that South Burlington has 4 census blocks. So, and one of them is based more or less the southeast quadrant. So it's southeast quadrant, kind of the core of city center, the northeast and the southwest, sort of Shelburne Road corridor. So the statistics by census block are reasonably
Right.
easy to do. Yeah. Block, tract,
They're tracks.
tract.
the tracks.
Yeah,
The
tracks are
smallest
made
is-
up of
The
blocks.
smallest one is tracts or the smallest one is blocks?
Blocks are the smallest ones.
That's what, we have 4
And
blocks.
there's the least amount of data available by blocks.
Correct. We have 4 of those.
For tracks.
Many blocks, 4 tracks.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, block is really what they call a block, you know.
Yeah.
Track is equivalent to a neighborhood, usually of a population of between 2,500 to 5,000, something like that. And they try and make them somewhat homogeneous. Very hard to do.
I agree with Sandy that we should try to keep our meeting till 8.
Yeah, no.
We
Yeah.
I was waiting for Vince to finish. So
Yeah.
I think we have a good plan for next meeting. Does anybody wanna recap? So next meeting, fair housing. We're going to have the state of housing. Does anybody wanna make a motion to adjourn?
So very quickly, the second Wednesday of the month is a good plan going forward. Helpfully, the 1st of January is both a holiday and the first Wednesday.
No.
So the second Wednesday is technically the 8th, which is the same as the NRCC because it is the first non-holiday Wednesday.
Make it the 15th.
Make it the 15th for January,
Okay.
and then is everyone all right for the 15th of January? And
That's the
then
case there. January has 5 Wednesdays.
it
then.
does in fact,
Oh, there you
it
go.
has 5.
The
So
January meeting for NRC is the 7th.
it's on the city calendar as being on the 8th, on the Wednesday, the 8th.
I thought it had to do with us not having a room available. But
Oh, all right, well,
well, that's what I thought we had.
Okay, so we're gonna do it the 7th or the 8th or the
15th.
15th, okay.
so we'll move, so January will be January 15th, and from February onward, it will be the second Wednesday. Correct.
All right,
Okay, before we adjourn, let me remind people, if you can think of books that we might use during that week, let's take a look at it. Can we distribute them without having a warned meeting? Can we distribute them just to each other?
Send emails to me,
Yeah,
and then I am able to send informational emails out to all of you. What can't happen is all of you sending emails to each other, because you're technically communicating with a quorum of the people, but I can send out just information to everybody, but if you respond, reply only to me, not
okay.
reply all.
Okay.
That's all.
so book ideas should go to her and
Yep.
as soon as possible, and we can do, regional reviews of them. It might kind of be a catalyst to the educational effort.
absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
Nora Ryan has a question.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Hey, yeah, I just want to say thank you. I've really enjoyed the discussion. It was really great hearing the backgrounds that you bring into this, especially hearing about all of the social work that many of you come with. And I know Larry said he's not so much for policy, but I've heard Larry at enough meetings to know that he asks great questions, and I know that that will be a valuable contribution. In the past, it was hard to feel if everyone was really committed to housing being more available and more affordable. I know, Megan mentioned John's letter to the editor, and we had people on this committee who were on the same group as him, and have still been recently advocating against expanding housing opportunities to the city council. So it's nice to see everyone being really committed to getting the data and promoting as much as we can in like a healthy housing ecosystem. So thank you guys very much, and I look forward to seeing more of your meetings in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks,
Have a good
Ryan.
evening.
All right.
I'll move to adjourn.
And out. Also,
Does anybody want to second it?
if enough people leave, there's no more quorum,
Yeah.
so you actually
All
don't
in
need to
favor?
move to adjourn. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Sandy. Good to
welcome.
see you.
And take-
Everybody have a good
yeah, take-
rest of the week.